welcome you here this evening. We have, for me, a very interesting lecture and presentation for you this evening. A little bit of background. A little over a month ago, my brother Tim and I were having a discussion about our plans for the next year. And as a lot of you might already know, the Communiversity kind of grew out of Razzaq's books. And as Razzaq's books goes, it seems so goes the Communiversity. So I was telling Tim that as things develop, we've been doing one or the other. Razzaq's books grew, then the Communiversity grows. So in order for, we feel, partly for the Communiversity to grow some more, Razzaq's books is going to have to grow some more. So we wanted to focus a little more on our business of Razzaq's books. And after I had that discussion with him, I happened to be down at my parents' house in Bordentown, and I was just looking over the bookshelf, and I was just going to pull out as many of the books that my father, who has been in business for himself for quite a long time, had on business. And we were just going to go over some things and do some more development. And I pulled this book off the shelf. It's called The Black Folks Guide to Business Success. I didn't really look in it. I didn't look at it. I just picked it up, and I said, Dad, I'm going to borrow this book for a little while. And I brought it back up here, and Tim and I were sitting in the office, and I told him, Tim, I just grabbed this book from down in Bordentown. And Tim said, yeah, I remember, I remember when we had got it, and he also mentioned knowing the gentleman that wrote this book. So I took the book back with me, and I was reading it, and then about 4 days after that, Tim and I were sitting right here in this room. I was sitting about where you're sitting, Brother Kurt, and Tim was sitting over there where Millicent's sitting. We were talking about economic development, and we were discussing again the ways we might do some more things to enhance Razzaq's books. And the doorbell rang. And when we went and opened the door, the author of this book walked through the door. And he walked through the door and he was holding a flyer. And he said that he had picked up the flyer down in City Hall. Now, neither Tim or myself had put flyers in City Hall at this time. And he said he was around the corner at the television station because he had an appointment for 11:30. And when he got there, they told him that they weren't going to need him until about 12:30. So he decided to come around here and see what we were doing. And we got into a discussion at that time. And he agreed to come here this evening and do a presentation for us. That person is Brother George Subira. Again, he's the author of this book, The Black Folks Guide to Business Success.
Yeah, I'm not so sure if they really got significance of you all having this discussion and the gentleman walk through that door.
Well, yeah, for us, again, I can say that the way I did because since we've started with the reorganization of Razzaq's books and with the Communiversity, we've been guided in how we've been going about this. And we operate on the principle of NOMO. And basically what NOMO means is that when you speak it, you bring it into being. That's why in Ebonics, you'll hear us not conjugate the verb to be so much. Because as Dr. Ernie Smith explained to us, in traditional African languages, there really was no verb to be. People operated on NOMO. When you speak it, you bring it into being.
Right.
And like I said, something guided me to Bordentown to pick up this book. And then something guided Brother Subira over here to see us at this particular time. He's also, excuse me, he's also the author of 4 other books. I told you about The Black Folks Guide to Business Success. He's the author of The Black Folks Guide to Making Big Money in America. And then 2 of these books that are still currently in print, Money Issues in Black Male-Female Relationships and Getting Black Folks to Sell. And he has brought with him this evening a lot of these other books that you see on the table. So I'm sure he'll elaborate on those later. But I would encourage you to look at these books and possibly purchase them for several reasons. They'll probably help you out quite a bit in whatever brought you here this evening, but also because Brother Subira is not being paid an honorarium tonight. And the sale of these books would probably help him also. And we would encourage you to do that because he's doing this out of the spirit of helping us do what we want. As you know, we started with a regular, almost monthly now, workshops and lectures on health. And it was also our intent to cover all the other areas of people activity the same way. So we wanted to move into the area of economic development. And when we did that, I reached into my network of people, and we had someone give us our first workshop on basic economics and investing, and that was Brother Linton Walters, who had been encouraging myself and several other young brothers to do something with the money we make as correction officers. So I would like to acknowledge Walt for putting us on the path toward developing our economic development aspects. Thank you for that, Dave. And this lecture and workshop tonight is basically the second in the series of our economic development workshops. The topic for tonight is going to be Kwanzaa past and present, and the principle of cooperative economics, or Ujamaa, which, as you know, is the principle for tonight in the Kwanzaa celebration. So, Brother Subira will be speaking again on Ujamaa, a history of black economics, struggle and development, and Kwanzaa past, present, and future. So with that, I'd like to present to you and introduce to you Brother George Subira.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And it is kind of interesting how things work out. I'm not too much of a believer in spacey kind of things, but every once in a while my belief system is challenged by what's staring me right there in my face. And it's very ironic that things worked out the way they did. This may be my first presentation ever in Trenton. I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, no. I spoke one other time about 12, 13 years ago in Trenton. I don't get here that often, even though I live in the Atlantic City area. New Jersey, period, is not a place that I get a chance to make too many presentations, and Trenton happens to be one which I've been a long time getting to. I want to thank you for coming out here in this bad weather tonight. When I saw the rain, I had a meeting up in New Brunswick. When I saw the rain coming down, I said, well, you can forget about tonight's presentation. Ain't going to be nobody showing up. But fortunately, I am wrong again. I like being wrong sometimes. And I want to thank you for coming out. What I want to do tonight is talk to you about Kwanzaa to a certain extent, black economics, the idea of cooperative economics, and I also want to spend some time at the end to talk about a new entity which I'm involved with, something called the Mata Network. Most of you probably have not heard of it. The company is only a year and a half old. And then hopefully there'll be enough time at the very end to have exchange of views, questions, answers, because I do have a tendency to say things that challenge people's feelings, sensibilities, research, political perspectives, and I don't like to just do that and not get a chance to have people, you know, question me, and we have an intelligent discussion back and forth. So that's a lot to try to cover, and I'm going to try not to be superficial about it, so I'm going to kind of go right into it. I don't know how long these things usually last, but I'll try to make mine as succinct as possible. Many of us do not really get a chance to be part of history, and then some of us who actually do get a chance to be a part of history don't really acknowledge it as such. It takes us a long time to really understand when we were a part of history. All of you who were at the Million Man March were a part of history. You may or may not have looked at it at that point. But 31 years ago, which is a hell of a long time, I happened to be a part of history and didn't know it at the time. I was a 20-year-old college sophomore, and I was a member of Maulana Karenga's US organization. I lived in Pasadena, California. The organization was based in L.A. I had been in the organization for about a year, and a little over a year, and he decided to have this thing called Kwanzaa. The first Kwanzaa, I don't remember it really lasting 7 days. I remember going to what we call the Karama on the 31st of December 1966. And I remember how it was and what went down. And I remember leaving there that night and remembering that nobody ever shouted Happy New Year. That's because we were getting away from that kind of an orientation and getting into an African perspective of things. And it's interesting to see, I was with Karenga and US organization for about 4 years. I left in 1969-ish. Came back to the East Coast in 1970 after I finally finished up my college education, if you want to call it that. And then I kind of sat back and did some other things. And so, as you know, this thing, Kwanzaa, has been just like multiplying and growing. And I see Karenga's got a story in this month's Ebony magazine, which is interesting, some of the things I read. But anyway, what I want to do is kind of talk to you a little bit about that whole Kwanzaa thing. And I don't mean to say that out of any kind of disrespect, but one of the things that happened is that Kwanzaa was a very, very, very small part of a whole organizational movement to re-Africanize the African American in this country, to get rid of some of the European values that we had embraced and had programmed into us, and to re-embrace, well, actually learn about first, and then embrace some African principles, because Karenga's idea, and I think it's just as valid now as it was then, is that if two people share the same culture, even though they may be of different skin color, even though they may be of different sexes, they're almost the same people. You really don't have different people until you have two people who practice different sets of values. If you have two people who practice and believe pretty much the same things, even though one might be black, one might be red, one might be yellow, they're much more similar in their orientation to the world than they would be if they have different cultures. So Karenga's position then, and I think it's his position now, is that until African Americans really have and believe and practice a different cultural value system in terms of how they look at things, they're never going to really pull themselves too much away from white folks, because they have too much that they share in their belief system. As it turned out, Karenga had some legal problems and had to, excuse me, miss, I just want to say that if you write on that book, it might come through.
This book?
Yeah. See, when you use that sharp pen, then...
Oh, okay.
Okay. Karenga had some legal problems, and those legal problems caused the organization to disband. And in his time of incarceration, he kind of went off into some other directions. And when he came out from incarceration, the idea of reinstituting the organization as it was probably was not the highest priority in his mind. So what happened was Kwanzaa was sort of like dropped onto the public, as opposed to coming out of an organizational concept. It was kind of dropped on the public. And of course, when you give somebody the football, they can run this direction, that direction, upstairs, downstairs. And so what has happened is that the public has sort of given Kwanzaa all kinds of meanings and interpretations that was not part of the original program. But that's part of what you do when you give something out to other people. It's at that point it becomes as much theirs as it becomes yours, and it's part of what you have to do. Karenga himself has kind of changed his original ideas about what he wanted Kwanzaa to stand for from when I knew it in the first, second, third, and fourth Kwanzaas. And consequently, that has probably led to its growth and acceptance because if he held true to what Kwanzaa was supposed to be about when we were originally started the concept, then I don't think as many people would have embraced it. Having said all of that, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa was really the 7 principles of the organization. They were the same thing. And so whereas I hear people say things like, wouldn't it be nice if we practice the principles of Kwanzaa every day of the year, I kind of grin, because that is exactly what us organization was trying to do. However, like all things, there are strengths and there are weaknesses. And the weakness, in my estimation, in my interpretation, the weakness of the US organization and Kwanzaa related to the same kinds of weaknesses that I find in most black nationalist organizations, most black nationalist thinkers to this very day. What do I mean? I mean that for reasons which I understand but I do not accept, there is an extremely long history of black nationalists completely ignoring the concept of economics. They talk about religion, they talk about name changes, they talk about music, art, they talk about history, they talk about the role of the woman, the role of father, children, they talk about health, they talk about almost everything under the sun except economics. It was that way in US organization way back when. There was no effort made in the US organization to do anything as far as economics. I mean, printing up a few sweatshirts and making a few African dresses did not constitute an economic movement. And to this very day, you know, I love Dr. Clark, I love Dr. Ben, I love Naim Akbar, I appreciate Dr. Leonard Jeffries, I appreciate Lefe Asante, I appreciate Karanga, I appreciate Asa Hilliard, I appreciate Wade Nobles, I appreciate all of them, but if you put them all together in a room, they don't have one decent economic program, all of them put together.
Yes, sir.
And that is just a shame when you look at maybe 150 years of research in the black experience, and between those 150 years, you have nobody addressing one of the fundamental things that makes people's lives work. So how am I, George Subira, a little bit different from the people that I name, in addition to not being a college professor, not working a 9-to-5 job, and being more entrepreneurially oriented, certainly not being as well known? Where am I at as compared to them? That's a decent question. I have 2 assumptions that I start off with. And everything that I say has a foundation resting on these 2 pillars, so to speak. The one foundation is that all people of all races and all religions in all countries in all times have always done 2 things. They made stuff and they sold it. There's no people in the history of recorded mankind civilization that did not make stuff and sell it or trade it. That's basic economics. That's part of all cultures. And it's one of the things that defines and differentiates human beings from animals. Animals may make stuff. They certainly don't think about buying it or trading it, to the best of my knowledge. That's human behavior. And for black people not to focus on what it is that they make and what it is that they trade and sell with other people strips them from one of the basic things that differentiates humans from animals. And if you listen to the lectures of all our great Afrocentric minds, they will dazzle you hour after hour about what we used to produce with no real mention of what we should be producing now. Or maybe they will talk about what we should be producing now, but absolutely no plan whatsoever of actually implementing it. So that's the first thing that I rest my foundation on. The second thing I rest my foundation on is this. I do believe that there is a gene that determines your height. I do believe there is a gene that determines your eye color I do believe there's a gene that's going to determine whether or not you're light skinned or dark skinned. But I do not believe there is a gene that predetermines that black people must work for white people all their lives. Okay? I do not believe there is such a gene. Now, the reason I make that statement is because our people act like there is a gene that says, this is my work for white folk gene. And they treat it and cultivate it just as much as if they cultivate their hair or exercise their body. It's a part of their reason for, if you ask African people, African American people, they act like that the sole reason why they were put on the face of the earth was to find somebody to work, white to work for. And when they find somebody white to work for and they give them a business card, believe me, they will do everything they can to share their business card with you at these networking sessions, proud as hell, to show you what it is that they do for whatever white folks felt like hiring them that particular year. So almost everything that I can possibly say rests on those two foundations, that people make stuff and sell it, and that we don't have to work for white folks. Now, everything else is kind of up for grabs. I'm willing to be flexible on most other points, but those 2 points I'm very clear on, okay? Now, let me talk about something else. Last year, almost to this very day, or was it this? It was to this very day. I gave a lecture in Youngstown, Ohio, and it was about 200 people there. A nice turnout. Everybody was in their African garb, and everybody was all humble and just, you know, in the spirit. And just before I spoke, they had a brother get up in front of the room, and he said, before we had the program, let's pay homage to our ancestors and pour the libations. And he had everybody hold hands, and they started to, he asked them to bow their heads and mention the names of forefathers and people who had gone on in the next life who had helped us fight the great battle, liberation. So I'm sitting there, and I'm listening to 200 people roll off 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 names, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. It hit me like a ton. I had to change my presentation that night. I mean, I was on next. As soon as they got finished saying that, I was supposed to get to the podium and speak, and I was so hit with what I heard, and it surprised me so much that I had to kind of like change my whole presentation. What happened was this, to show you how deeply embedded in our psyche we are in terms of this business economic thing. I sat there and I listened to as many names as I could. And I heard the names of politicians, I heard the names of civil rights leaders, I heard the names of Jackie Robinson, I heard the names of athletes, I heard the names of musicians, I heard the names of all kinds of people. But guess what name you never hear? The name of prominent black business people. You will never hear prominent business people, black. Don't make a difference how many black folks they hired. Don't make any difference how much money they loan people to get out of their jam. Doesn't make any difference what they invented to make people's life better. There's only one person that somehow escapes, and her name is mentioned. One lady. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Madam C.J. Walker is the only black business person's name that you will ever hear when you hear about black people praising people in the past as business people. So I'm saying to myself, now, Subira, do you know what these people are just telling you without knowing that they're telling you? They're telling you that in their mind it's almost inconceivable for them to see a black person as both a business person and a hero or a liberation fighter at one and the same time. You either A or B, you can't be both. Right. So how is it that we can talk about economic development today and in the future when we have no intention of even recognizing what we've already done the 100 and some years we've been out of slavery? So I said, okay, that's something that I need to bring to their attention so they can see what part of the problem is. Part of the problem is our own programming with respect to business. Now, how did this come about? Well, I don't have a guarantee that I can explain to you how it came about, but I do have a theory as to how it came about. And the theory is this: slavery was an extension of the capitalist system. And when you are against slavery and you are against a system that says reap the highest form of profit regardless of cost, even if it means genocide in terms of the Indians, even if it means slavery in terms of African Americans, then you just go ahead and do that because profit is the ultimate thing that we're looking for. And from that kind of anti-capitalist thought, we developed an anti-business attitude. Not to forget the fact that during the segregation phases of our existence in the early 1900s and mid 1900s, it was largely the business community that hired us at such, measly wages and kept us out of their concerns, had us coming at the back of the door and all that kind of stuff during era of segregation. And again, that did not endear us to them or them to us. And so I understand the genesis of the anti-capitalist, therefore anti-business thought. But if that was so logical, then we would never run for governor. We would never run for mayor because we sure enough had racist mayors, and we could talk about how corrupt the political system is and how we shouldn't be a part of that. But once it became clear, damn, if I can get enough people to vote for me and we can run this town, maybe we can make some changes. The same thing, it appears to me, could and should apply in the area of economics, but it just didn't go that way. It didn't go that way. We seem to have been willing to integrate and see as a tool for our use almost every aspect of American society except the economic system, which seems to be gaining favor more and more throughout all parts of the world that in the past couldn't care less about American capitalism. Anyway, so that is part of the past. And my struggle, I've been a writer since 1980, my struggle for 18 years has been trying to find black folks who are both black and about developing something. I find a lot of Afrocentric brothers and sisters. They can tell you about Egypt until your eyelids fall. They can tell you about Mali and Songhai, and they can tell you about what happened 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 900 years ago. But if you ask them, hey, can you lend me $10 until payday? I ain't got it, brother. I ain't got it now. If you ask me next week, I won't have it then. I have no plan on getting it, but I'm going to be the world's expert in terms of telling you what happened with the great Egyptian pyramid. But don't ask me, to borrow any money. And, the contradiction, I can remember when I was 19 years old. You're not supposed to know very much when you're 19, particularly when you haven't been introduced to, real knowledge, right? I remember in Pasadena at 19 years old working for a place called the West Side Study Center. And the West Side Study Center was a community center that dealt with getting jobs for youth in the summertime, helping people with their GEDs, helping people if they had problems with the military, getting them honorable discharges when they had this. Just an overall community agency. And I remember real deep discussions that the so-called heavy brothers had about the Mellons and the Rockefellers and the Fords and how they were robber barons and, took all this money and capitalists and all that. And I followed it and it made sense. And then one day I came in to maybe a place I shouldn't have come in, and they were writing this proposal for foundation funding. Okay. Well, where's the proposal going to? the Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm saying, weren't they the same dudes y'all was talking so bad about, like, last week? Last week, right? So why is it that y'all are applying, I mean, if they so bad, they had so much money till they decided to give some of it back to you, I guess, to a certain extent. From that date on, I saw the contradiction between the rap and the real deal when it comes to money. And to this very day, we have Negroes, men and women, who leave Columbia School of Social Work with a master's degree and basically are qualified to do nothing but write proposals to beg white folks for money for black causes. I mean, why are you going to go to school to study how to beg? I mean, I can appreciate a wino who has had bad problems in his life and he just, hey, give me a quarter, but you're going to spend $40,000 from undergraduate and graduate degrees to study the art of proposal writing, which is another way of saying begging. And so I never really got too much into that whole thing. Now, let me stop now and say that it's been a problem finding African Americans to trust to put an economic program together because, well, let me say it this way. Most African Americans I run into three categories, okay? First category is the biggest category of all. They're not particularly consciousness of their blackness, and they're not particularly consciousness of the responsibility of producing something with their life, okay? They're about survival. That's the greatest majority of the people that I run into. The second group of people are people I mentioned already. They are very Afrocentric. They know all the handshakes. They know all the phrases. They know all the accomplishments of Malcolm and the accomplishments of Garvey and all of that. But like I said, a lot of them, you know, they're broke. They have no feeling of responsibility that they have to produce something, not for white folks, but for their own development, for their own community. And so they get by and get over as best they can. And then I run into these business school types who are very much into money, very much into business, know all about financial statements, brag about, you know, their knowledge of the Wall Street Journal, but unfortunately their black consciousness can be put underneath the fingernail of most of the people in this room because that's just that minute. And I've been constantly looking for the last 18 years that I've been in business for the fourth type of person. And the fourth type of person is that person who is very clear about his African ancestry and all that has transpired between there and here, but also understands that to be an effective mover and shaker in his own community, much less the world or the country, or he or she has responsibility of producing things and making life better for their offspring, not because Carnegie Mellon decided to give a grant this week, but because they came up with a way to come up with a product or a service that people are willing to buy because they find value in that product or service. And they don't mind paying for it because it helps them. And so that's been my mission, is to try to both develop the fourth kinds of people as well as trying to find them so that I can interact with them. And it's been quite a struggle. Now, let me move from that to the present. There's a guy, well, there's two guys who've known each other for 20 years. One guy's name is Ken Bridges, and the other guy's name is Al Wellington. Ken Bridges lives in Philadelphia. Al Wellington lives in South Jersey. And Ken and Al are really the epitome of the kind of brothers that I have been looking for. And now that I have found them, I'm going to be with them for a long time, maybe till they put us all in the ground. Ken and Al both have MBA degrees from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. They both worked at corporate America. Both of them worked for Scott Paper Company, as a matter of fact. Both of them have made big bucks working for white folks, learning from white folks all that they could learn in order to then take that information to do some other things with. It has taken a long time for them to come to a point where they can actually say, we have something here. But the genesis of what it is that they've developed, and I want to tell you what it is that they've developed, but I want to tell you a little bit about how it came to be. A little bit about how it came to be. Al is a marketing research guy. Al Wellington has had his own consulting firm for about 20 years, and basically he's worked for the enemy. And he'll tell you that. Basically, he has been consulting with major Fortune 500 companies, telling them how to get deeper into black folks' pockets. How do you advertise to black folks? What is it that black folks buy? Why do they buy it? When do they buy it? How much do they spend when they buy it? What's the turn off? What's the turn on? What percentage of the market share do they have? So on and so on and so on and so on. To the extent that Ken is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on black people's spending habits of any living, breathing human being in the entire universe. Okay? Because he has done 700 separate studies for white folks, getting paid to tell them, always with the intention of one day being able to use that information for himself and his people. That's Al's story, a shortened version. Ken's story is a little different. Ken went from one white frying pan into another white frying pan. He worked for Scott Paper Company in the marketing department, earning over $50,000 when he was just about 30 years old. So he was doing real good, had himself a little sports car, had himself a nice home, and doing real well. But knew that deep down inside, this wasn't what he was supposed to be doing with his life. That's not what his ancestors went through all their hell for, because he was in charge, I think, of Scott Tissue, and he just felt it was so stupid to have an MBA degree from the Wharton School of Business at an Ivy League school, and the purpose of his life was to see how much profit the company was making in selling toilet paper. It just didn't sound logical to him. So he was looking for another vehicle for freedom. And in 1981, or 1980, I'm not sure, quite a while ago, he saw his freedom in a company called Amway. So he left Scott Paper with his big-time degree and his $50,000 salary, and he got involved in Amway. And unlike other people, the overwhelming majority of white and black people, he was very successful at Amway, making at the very top of his career over $100,000 a year, and had a downline organization of 3,000 people, 99.9% of which were African American. He was working with the biggest black in Amway. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is George Halsey, living in Greensboro, North Carolina. How many of you heard of George Halsey? Okay. George Halsey had like 30,000 black people in his organization, and when he was at his very peak, and Ken had 3,000 of those 30,000. Well, the plan was to build a nice, strong organization, and then at a certain time, make some demands on the company to be a little bit more sensitive to African Americans' needs, to be a little bit more responsive to what time it was in the black community. And the plan went along as far as conversation, but then when it came time to act, certain people decided they weren't going to jeopardize their money. Well, Ken did jeopardize his money because he basically quit. I mean, he walked away from $100,000 plus income. This is 1982 $100,000 a year money, not 1997 $100,000 a year money. There's a difference. Huh? Right. So he walked away, and then he did some other things. I don't know exactly what he did in the meantime, but somewhere around 1986, 1987, he got involved in a company called CCI. Any of y'all ever heard of that? Correction Connection. This was a company that marketed the Dick Gregory Bahamian diet. Some of y'all heard of Dick Gregory Bahamian diet, okay. So, in Amway, he was an outsider. He was a person who, we have all kinds of things on that book too. I just noticed that. In any event, he was an outsider as an Amway person in the sense that he wasn't part of the company. But in CCI, he was an insider because it was a black company. And his job was to develop the distribution network that actually sold the diet to all the people that were interested in buying the diet. And to this very day, the CCI has been the only black company in network marketing ever to be on the Black Enterprise Top 100 businesses, you know, that list that they put together every year about which is the top businesses. So he's been successful on two fronts, both as an outsider in a very tough company working with black folks, and as an insider in a black-owned company, again, working with black folks. These two guys have come together as a result of the Million Man March, because they, like I, was both inspired and yet frustrated by the Million Man March. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously inspired because nobody had ever seen 1 million+ black men come together before in peace and harmony, standing there, going through all kinds of emotional and educational experiences there for a day on the mall. But if you go back and listen to the videotape, like maybe 10 hours of videotape, you will find the same thing in that videotape that you'll find in the entire history of us as a people. Very, 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 very little mention of anything economic. Okay? Farrakhan had everybody wave the dollars in the air, and they put them in them boxes, right. And he promised the to-the-penny accounting, right, in a very short period of time, right. And that was October 16th, and I think that accounting came right around March of the following year in small print somewhere, but most brothers and sisters don't have a clue as to what happened to that money. We do know that all of a sudden, I'm not making any suggestion here, he went on an unplanned worldwide tour, going through country after country after country with an entourage of whatever. But I'm sure that was just a coincidence. I'm sure it was. And then we had the Million Woman March last month, 2 months ago. Had 1 million sisters there. Had all the right people. Winnie Mandela, I guess she's still in the category of right people. Maxine Waters. No mention of economics. So, I mean, we got this disease, perhaps genetic disease, that says we just do not have this ability to deal with this thing called money and economics. So they were inspired by the fact that Al did a study. He interviewed 1,070 men, because by June of 1995, he was clear that this thing was going to go down and that there was a reasonable chance that there was going to actually be 1 million men. So he wanted to get inside their heads. As a marketing research person, which is what he does, he wants to know, why are you here? What's on your mind? What motivated you to come here? What do you think we should be doing as a people? How do you think we should be doing? So on and so on and so on and so on. So he worked with the Political Science Department of Howard University. He sent 70-some-odd students out there in the mall, giving 15-minute interviews, one-on-one, to males that were 18 years old or older, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon had data already analyzed and organized in the suites of the hotel rooms where he and about 10 other students were taking in these interview forms, and became rather clear about what the men wanted on the mall. And what the men wanted on the mall was, we need an economic program. We need to own our own businesses. We need to support our black businesses. We need a broad-based black unity. And so that was the inspiration to get Al to call Ken and say, Ken, it's time for us to come back together, put all this stuff that we know together, and build this company called the Mata Network. So the Mata Network came into existence on the 13th of November of this year. So we're talking about a company that's only a little over a month and a half old. And what the Mata Network is is a computer-based company that is very friendly to black manufactured products. What I mean very friendly is if you have something that you've developed, that you've produced, you've invented it, whether it be in the area of health, it's in the area of black dolls, books, calendars, anything that people use, artwork, anything that people use and buy, they'll take a look at it, and if a deal can be struck up in terms of pricing, they will accept it into the system as something that they'd want to sell. Now, how is this thing supposed to work? Well, it's based on certain theories, okay? Theory number one is that black people need to come into the computer age. Now, that's a very sensitive kind of a thing because you have a lot of people who are relatively bright, like me, for example, who really are turned off by computers more than turned on, who see computers as kind of what part of the problem is, not necessarily part of the solution. But I'm sure that's based on my ignorance of computers and my lack of exposure. I'm sure they're going to turn my ass around and teach me all the good things. But they believe that the internet is the future. They're not interested in making a company that's a 20th century company. They're interested in putting a company together that is a 21st century company. And they believe this. They believe that in spite of all the craziness that we seem to do as a people, that there is at least 15 to 20% of black America who wants to do something serious in terms of a black economic program. Now that means 80% aren't, but they don't care about those 80%. They say we can get to these 7 million black people who actually want to do something and work with just them. And if we could get just 10% of those, we would have an organization of 700,000 black people. And if all of us was linked up together online, on a computer, where we could send messages to each other, dealing with the whole area of empowerment and economics, where you can hit a couple of keys and communicate to 700,000 people inside the United States, that would make us the most powerful black organization in the United States, because nobody else is that organized. If we can then buy and sell things to each other, even in small amounts of $50 to $100 per month, that would make us a billion-dollar company. Black America doesn't have a billion-dollar company. I mean, I recognize what Reggie Lewis has done, but let's face it, all those companies basically that the TLC did is European food companies, South American food companies. You don't hire any black people unless you want to go to France and work for them. Right. Ain't too many people I know that hard up for a job, gonna leave the country behind and work, you know. But I mean, the black people in America have never built a billion-dollar company on their own. He bought a billion-dollar company. We think that is a worthy goal. We think that's a doable goal. We think we're going to do it. It doesn't really matter how long it's going to take, because we intend to be alive for another 20 years anyway, so we may as well do this to make a statement.
Right.
Because basically that's all you can do when you're alive, is make a statement. You know, whether you're Michael Jordan and you make a statement about who you are as Michael Jordan, or whether you're Denzel Washington and make a statement about who you are as Denzel Washington, or whether you're Malcolm and make a statement about who you are as Malcolm. In this case, we would like to make an economic statement about what it is that we have the potential to do. And we also understand bandwagon jumping. Y'all know about bandwagon jumping?
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you about bandwagon jumping. Most people who were in on the real deal as far as the Million Woman March, most people will tell you that about 500,000 black women, that's a big number, right? 500,000 black women did not make up their mind to go to the Million Woman March until the week before. That's half the whole group. Somebody gonna organize something for a whole year, or longer than a year, and then half the people in attendance make up their mind like 2 or 3 days before. But that's what happened. That's what happened. Because once they see that, oh shit, this thing is going to happen anyway. Well, hell, if it's going to happen anyway, I may as well just go ahead on and check it out. Cool bloods, right? Always checking something out. We feel that once the word gets out that you have this economic entity that the progressive minded, so to speak, African Americans are part of, and that word gets out, whether it be by word of mouth or whether it be in terms of a magazine article or whether it be whatever, that a whole lot of people will jump on it. And that's just in this country. Now, what do you think is going to happen when brothers and sisters in South Africa and Nigeria and Caribbean and South America, when they find out that there's this company in America where if you can get to them, you can communicate to like 700,000 black folks, and nobody's going to mess with your message. I mean, it's not like the CIA is going to break in and recode your message on the internet. I mean, maybe another 100 years they might do that, or maybe less, but not in 3 years. We don't think so. So that's part of what it is that I'm a part of now, and it's a very interesting concept that's going to happen. And it's just very exciting being a part of a group of people whose heads are pretty much all in the same spot. Also, a big part of that Mata network is the education component. See, because one of the board members enlightened one of the founders a year ago. Ken Bridges, although he was very successful in Amway and did have 3,000 black people sign up in his leg, was still frustrated at how difficult it was to get our folks involved. And one of the board members said to him one day, he said, you know, you can't really be a good business person unless you have high self-esteem, because you just take a whipping out there in the real world trying to make it on your own. You got to have a very high opinion of yourself if you're going to survive. He said, and the reason most black people shy away is because self-esteem is based on having high race esteem. You can't feel that good about yourself as an individual if you feel black people as a group ain't doo-doo. So you got to have a high regard of black people first as a group, and then there's a possibility that you can have a higher opinion about yourself. So when he said that, a little light went on in Ken's head, and it has not been shut off since. So as part of the Mata network, they have a book of the month, tape of the month concept that they're going to be working in, so that many of the books that you see here and tapes will be part of the ongoing education session in the Mata network. They have a relationship with the people at ASCAP. ASCAP, yeah. So they're going to be getting. We already sell tapes by this brother who I never heard when he was alive. Amos Wilson. Yeah. This other brother who I have heard. No, this brother in D.C. I can't remember his name right now.
Tony Brown?
No, older brother talks about the.
Oh, Neely Full?
No, he talks about the Caucasian 12,000 years ago when he didn't have but so much time to plan his food. Oh, what is his name?
Oh, Richard?
No, I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, No. This is a brother that not many people have heard of, but he's a deep dude. I've heard him once myself in person. He lives in D.C. here. He's a deep dude. He's a real deep dude. But anyway, so there's going to be an education session as well as the financial thing going on, and I feel real excited about that. And it's something that each of you can be a part of. I left out the car without my briefcase, which means I didn't bring any of the information with me, but we can get back to that a little later. Now, having said all of that, and it now being almost 8:30, I want to open it up for discussion. You may have a question about Kwanzaa. You may have a question about what I said about our elders not having an economic program. You might want to ask me something about the Mata Network. Or you may want to ask me something about something you read in one of my books, if some of you have ever read any of my books. So I'm just going to kind of open it up for discussion right now and just take whatever anybody wants to deal with.
Okay, we talked about the black nationalists not having an affinity with economic development.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the father of black economic development, I guess, would be Booker T. Washington, and
Mm-hmm.
more or less. So you never hear the black nationalists call Booker T. Washington. He's considered Uncle Tom,
Mm-hmm.
a black nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
But they love Marcus Garvey,
Mm-hmm.
and Garvey was a big fan of Booker T. Washington.
Right,
In
right,
fact, he came to the country looking for Booker T. Washington.
right.
You know, and I guess it was Booker T. Washington first founded the Negro Business League.
Right.
You know, so I guess he would be the father of economic development. So you have this dichotomy within the black struggle
Mm-hmm.
that's really started at the turn of the century. It goes back to the struggle between the Boers, so-called struggle between the Boers.
Well, no, it actually goes back before then. And I'm not going to say struggle. See, there's a book. When that thing hit me last year, when I realized how we have this problem with looking at black business people as heroes, I was actually working on a book that should have been out now, but everything came to a stop when I got involved in the Mata Network. I was in the middle of writing a book. Actually, I was past the middle, called Kwanzaa and the Black Economy, where I was going to say a lot of things that I've been kind of wanting to say about Kwanzaa and nationalists and black economics and the whole bit. And one of the things that I did, as I always do, is I try to go back into history to look for certain things. And what I realized is that we have a number of people in our history who were actually quite important in the struggle of black liberation, who were at the same time wealthy brothers. I mean, the first recorded voyage of Africans in America going back to Africa was on a ship owned by a black man who paid for the voyage himself.
Right.
Okay? Now, yeah, as with all the black history books I read, that nobody ever made it a big deal to point that out. There was a brother in Philadelphia who many look at as one of the founders of the Underground Railroad, who was responsible for getting many brothers and sisters to the Canadian border and out of free, who was a wealthy sail maker. Huh? Whipper?
Yes.
No, that wasn't the name. It was Still, I think.
He was out of Burlington. I think he was out of Burlington.
Okay, but there's just a number. There's a number of people who, when you look at their story, when you look at this guy, and I got the names home in the book I'm working on.
When Gaston died, what's the guy that helped King a lot? Gaston that died.
Yeah, A.J. Gaston. Yeah. When you read about the brothers who founded the Atlanta Life Insurance Company and North Carolina Mutual Insurance and Company, and see what they came through as far as being shoeshine people and barbers, and then they take that money and buy real estate, and then they do something else, and then do something else, and they found this bank, and then they find, it's like, damn, you're talking about making something out of nothing. But again, these people are not projected to us by our own historians. I ain't talking about white folks. By our own black historians, when they run the deal down on what was happening chronologically in our development, you know, they talk about the music, they'll talk about who was the first black to ride a horse in the Kentucky Derby and won. I mean, that's not that important to me, you know. But they don't talk about the people who founded institutions that last 100 years. I mean, North Carolina Mutuals still here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? 100 years later.
I think
So
the tallest, they used to own the tallest building in Durham.
in Durham, right. So I'm saying that there's a lot of people who, you know, we need to understand was about both liberation and business back in the 1700s.
Yes, sir.
That somebody needs to kind of bring that out, you know, in some of these books so that it's not lost on us. As much as Marcus Garvey is like the biggest example, the most well-known example of combining ideas of black liberation with economic development, he sure wasn't the first. And I was very clear on that when I did my little research in the book I was writing. I just can't spout off the names maybe like I should.
Short question.
Okay.
What's your opinion of the role of so-called civil rights, so-called civil rights movement impact on black business? Because I know I was a boy growing up in the South under segregation. Okay, we had like we had a strip. We had hotels. We had our own. You probably heard we had our own beach.
Right.
And it seemed like all those things we lost.
Well,
the immigration movement.
You know, it's one of the things that confuse people when they use this word freedom is the difference between freedom from and freedom to. You know, like I can't stand people who make this statement. Well, you know, Martin and Malcolm wanted the same thing. They were just going about it differently. That's bullshit. Okay? Martin and Malcolm did not want the same thing. They both wanted freedom from oppression, freedom from segregation, freedom from certain things. When you fill in the freedom from line, they pretty much in agreement. But when you talk about freedom to do things, Malcolm wanted the freedom, well, for most of his life, he wanted the freedom to build a black nation within the United States with 5, 6, 7 states. That's mostly what he wanted. Martin had no interest in that. You know, he wanted the freedom to implement an ideology that would allow black people to love themselves and not have the European value system that so many of us have inherited and been enslaved under. Martin Luther King did not have any concept of that. So what I'm saying is that I understand the value of the civil rights movement in terms of freeing us from certain forms of oppression and mental degradation and a sense of feeling like you're less than a real person. But at the same time, you know, our people just kind of took it way out to left field and decided to just taste, touch, marry anything white that we could get our hands on as part of our, I don't know, coming out party as to being real people or something. I don't really know, but, you know, it's obvious. People have spoken on it a lot, you know, to this very day about so much had been lost. But I think it could be regained, and it's interesting to check out this brother Robert Johnson and all the stuff he's doing. As a matter of fact, going back to that idea of a hero, I was mentioning this to a friend of mine. We used to live in an apartment together when I was in California. I was telling him some of the stuff I was doing. We was rapping, and he told me something which I must admit, guess I'm sort of like, I'm not so different than most black folks that I don't fall into some of the same traps that they do. But he said to me, he said, you know, there's a brother living right here in California that is responsible for developing 500 black millionaires. People really don't talk about him in the sense of being a hero. He doesn't come up much in the black media today. He used to a lot, and even when he was at his peak, he didn't do it a lot because he was the behind-the-scenes business person behind what was going on. And just to test the crowd, the audience that I was in, I've asked them, okay, now y'all into hero worshiping as a people. We always got to get role models out there, and business should have its role models. Name somebody that's still alive today. He's not young, but he ain't dead. Who's responsible for developing 500 black millionaires? And in a room of 100 people, typically, I might get one person who, after their third guess, might get the person's name. Anybody here want to take a guess?
California? That's what I was going to say. He lives in California?
He lives in California now. He didn't always live in California. If I tell you where he used to live, Barry Gordon. Barry Gordon.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
That's why
I mean, people think just the people in front of the microphone made the money. but you got so many arrangers, songwriters, producers, I mean, all kinds of promoters, all kinds of people got wealthy off of what Berry Gordy created. But when he put his book out, what did it sell? Who sold it? I went to a bookstore in downtown Birmingham when it first came out, and the lady had ordered one copy. She said, that's the same copy the man delivered here 3 months ago. I said, 3 months it's been sitting, and you haven't sold one copy? In a city like Birmingham? I mean, one copy? And it's like that. Business people, John Johnson's books, Succeeding Against the Odds, I don't think sold that many copies. In the most recent issue of Black Enterprise magazine, Earl Graves has this statement beside his book, over 40,000 copies sold. Well, you figure Black Enterprise magazine produces 300,000 copies a month, and the readership is at least 2.5 million. So how come he's only sold 40,000? What part of 40,000? I mean, 25,000 is 1% of the readership of 2.5 million. So he sold a little bit, he sold less than 2% of the readership of his magazine.
Would you elaborate a little more on why you think the reasons behind that is? And the reason why I'm asking, like, say with a person like Berry Gordy, even though we don't focus on that part of it, I'm sure all of us could probably tell you some negative story about Berry Gordy that has gotten out there, whether it's the way he treated his artists or the way he stole, quote unquote, stole money or kept people from making money. And the reason, I mean, I'm relating to the idea that, again, because we usually like to believe what somebody else tells us more than what we tell ourselves, is that they will focus on that, again, to keep us from, it's like, you know, they'll hide that part there and keep us looking at the negative aspects instead of looking at that. And another person I use is, on a smaller level, is like Don King. They'll always tell you about all the black boxers that Don King has stolen money from, although white promoters and managers have been doing that, yet they won't tell you that it was Don King that got the first $1 million boxing match, or that it was, you know, Don King that got a lot of boxing. I'm not saying he's a good role model, but I'm saying, would you elaborate on maybe
well,
what you're feeling?
the fact of the matter is that you don't really know what a situation is until you're in that situation yourself. I mean, I can ask each one of you about your life, and you're going to tell me some aspects of your life that you don't mind public. But some of the most terrifying or embarrassing or shameful or things that will impact you the rest of your life, you ain't going to tell me that. Because it's just nothing that you don't feel a need to just blab about, okay? And so, I mean, every person, and if I were to try to, even if I found out, and I questioned you or you about it, you might have a way of explaining it that's totally different than what the logical person would assume happened, because they heard it maybe from scuttlebutt, rumor, innuendo, whatever. And so what I'm saying is that all of us has a certain amount of skeletons in our closet, and it's not like Berry Gordy had a roadmap to say, when you become a black multimillionaire, fighting the mafia, fighting the white industry, fighting these people, fighting this, this is what you're supposed to do. You know what I mean? There is no such book like that. You got to go out there. I mean, I'm still wondering to this day why Don King ain't dead. Because I've been hearing the mafia runs boxing all my life. And the mafia's supposed to kill people when you go on their turf. Well, ain't making money in Africa and Kuala Lumpur and Jamaica, millions and millions, ain't that stepping on your territory? When you have 8 of the top 10 heavyweights in the division, ain't that part of your territory? I mean, a dope dealer 8 mile blocks from here would blow you away for taking over his corner. So why is it that he ain't found dead in the gully? So, I mean, part of it, you have to admire, but then part of it, there is some dirt there. You know? You fix my car, I'm glad, but you're full of grease, don't sit on my couch. Because as much as I appreciate you for fixing my car, that don't mean I want you sitting on my white couch. You know what I'm saying? Or beige or whatever the case might be, because you get grease all over it and I will never get it clean. So I'm saying that, you know, I know just in the book business when I got started, you go into a black bookstore, there was no business section. In order to be a business section, there had to be business books. I had the first ever black self-help book. Okay? Black Folks Got to Make a Big Money in America was the first black financial self-help book, period. So I couldn't take it to a black newspaper and say, could you review this in your business section? Black newspapers did not have a business section in 1980, 81, 82, 83.
Right. I read that. That was a good book.
Thanks. So, I mean, it's difficult if you don't have anybody to say, what do you do when you get in this situation? It's difficult. And so I can only admire, you know, what they did. Now, what bothers me, you know, is when I look to see, okay, they handed the baton off to some other people, and then they hand the baton off to some people. Now, this is supposed to be progress, right? And then we get somebody like, and I'll probably step on some toes here, but I step on toes all the time. We get somebody like Puffy and all those people making money calling black women bitches and whores and you suck this and kiss that and we all millionaires. And it's like, is that what Berry Gordy did that trailblazing for you to graduate to that point? Right. I mean, is that progress?
Very good.
So, I mean, and they had road maps. They could go back and say, right, what did you do when you got in this situation? You know what I mean? And they, instead of worrying about the mafia taking them off, they taking themselves off. Or so it's supposedly been, you know. So I'm saying that it's rough out here trying to be objective and trying to be fair and give everything its weight because it's so easy to be tilted one way or another. I would say, however, that when you are somebody like a Berry Gordy and you put a book out there, you know that everybody that you brought up is a celebrity and they can get book deals. I mean, Smokey has a book, Gladys Snell has a book, Diana Ross had a book, Michael never wrote his own book, but he has books out on him. I'm saying if you really say too much that's a bold-faced lie in your own book, there's certainly plenty of people that you've interacted with that could come out and say, that's bullshit. This is what really happened. I don't know why he get the nerve to even shape his mouth to say that. You know what I'm saying? So, but to my best of my knowledge, that has never happened. You know, the fact of the matter is that even with all those benefits, I mean, let's face it, it was probably harder than what we probably assumed it was, but it still was a glorious life. Yeah. I mean, there's still no reason for David Ruffin to die of an overdose in some drug house in Philly and be thrown off at the hospital. I mean, you know, a lot of guys went out just for the same craziness as if they never had an opportunity. He couldn't change that. Right. You know? So, that's the only way I can answer that question.
You know, not to continue on this, but something interesting, like you said, Berry Gordy was, you know, to help, how many people he helped. I remember reading in the, I think it was the Forbes magazine where they listed 400 richest people. Mm. And this may have been about 9 or 10 years ago, but it did have, like, Berry Gordy and Johnson as the only two blacks. And I had asked people that same question. I asked them, did they, you know, name some blacks that you would think were in there? And they named Michael Jackson and these different people. And I was astonished, too, that it was those two. You think probably because they were more, like the artists themselves really don't make a lot of the money.
It's a very simple way to answer that. Wealth is defined by ownership. Yeah. If you own it and it's worth something, then you're worth something. If all you do is get a salary or get sign a contract and get a royalty, I mean, it's good to go for a lifestyle, but it's not considered, you know, wealth. You know, now you look at somebody like Lionel Richie, right? Now Lionel Richie has not made any serious concert money in probably 10 years, okay? But he has the publishing rights to about 10 songs that were some of the biggest sellers in the history of Motown. So he's going to get a significant check, you know, for the rest of his life if he never sings in front of a stage again, you know. The same thing can be said about anybody that owns the rights to something, whether it be book rights, photograph rights, or song rights, or whatever the case might be. But the bottom line is that we as a people have to focus on ownership. And see, this is what's so depressing. Like, one of the things that I'm eventually going to write about if I don't die first, I really want to write a book on black people and property. I really want to write a book on that. Somebody sold us, said, look, you got 100 acres here, but it ain't worth nothing. You just sitting here working 16 hours a day. Why don't you sell me this land and you go up and get yourself a real job in Detroit working on the factory line? And hundreds of thousands of people did that.
My whole family did that.
And when they got to Detroit, they got a good paying job, but they owned this apartment, and they paid, and they paid, and they paid, and they paid. And then when they go back home, that farm is a shopping center now with, you know, mall. So-and-so's 40 acres is now Salisbury Mall. And so how much money was made from the time white folks converted it from farmland to industrial property to commercial property to now rental property in terms of malls? So, I mean, they may have made more money in the transactions that built that mall than the people who actually worked the land the previous 100 years. So it's about what you do with your assets in terms of defining, you know, your net worth and how you, quote, rank in terms of being a mover and shaker in your community. So that's part of it.
You know, also, I agree with you. You were talking about when you hear people talking, they talk about Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and they don't zero in on economics.
Right.
And I remember when I worked up at Princeton University, and I would engage in conversation with white students, and we would talk about racism and things of that nature. And one white student said, Reg, he said, you know, racism is terrible, it's bad. He said, but black people should be fighting economic discrimination. Mm-hmm. And, you know, help me out with that. What was he zeroing in on when he was talking about this thing of economic discrimination?
I don't know what he meant. There's all kinds of economic discrimination. I mean, the fact that people in poorer communities, on one hand, have to pay more. Is this winding down? Am I going over time? Okay, I want to be conscious of time. Yep. Poor people pay more money for a lot of things than other folks seem to in certain situations. And also, if you're an entrepreneur in the black community, sometimes you don't make as much profit because you have higher expenses.
Right.
You know, I mean, in some fast food franchises in a ghetto, you might see a guard. You know, he may or may not have a gun, but he's there to prevent, you know, robbery and whatever. Whereas you go into the suburbs, that cost is not part of what he has to factor in. There's all kinds of ways that people who, but let me just say this: anything you don't plan and orchestrate yourself, you're going to be more subject to the whims of chance than a person who does plan for it.
Right.
Okay, that's just natural. It's like you planning your day. There's some people who have a things to do list, and they get a lot of stuff done because they know from the time they get up in the morning what they want to have done by the time they lay their head in the bed at night. And then there's some people who don't have a clue as to what a things to do list is, and they just say, well, let me just go out here and go to work and, you know, one day at a time. You see what develops.
Right.
And they don't get nothing done. So, I mean, even in something as small as your time, we're not even talking about money, you know, then there's people who go to the mall when you buy something at a mall, many times you're paying the highest possible price that item can be sold for. Because you're paying for the mall location. You're paying for the parking lot. Why should you have to pay for a parking lot? Well, because that's part of what they got to pay for, so you're going to pay for it. But, you know, unless our people are sat down in a chair like this and taught exactly some economic facts of life, they're going to just figure, well, you know, why not? Just, you know, everybody else does it, you know what I mean? So that's all part of economic discrimination. Ignorance will go against the person when people are looking to get in your pockets. And when it comes to economics, we're about as ignorant of people as there is in the United States. We might be smart in a lot of other areas, but economics is certainly not one of them. You had a question?
I think it's more of a comment. I was going to ask you, what would you consider to be a guide for people to start planning, to start knowing more economically? I feel like we, the 20-something age, don't really have anyone that passed the baton to us. My parents, they may make good money, but they're both working until they can retire. That's what they're looking forward to.
Right.
Like, you can't get them past thinking you should do something for yourself, even though they have skills, lots of skills to do things for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Even my grandparents, same story.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather did work for himself, but because of habits, eating habits, whatever, he became ill before he was able to pass on that information to us. Even I knew my great-grandparents, I don't even know what they did. I mean, they may have had their own business. I don't know. I don't even know what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, I feel like there's a gap between our generation and whoever came before us. While there may be some people, we don't know them. Like you said, naming millionaires, we don't know who those people are.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's a gap with a lot of things. Not only that, with figuring out male and female relationships. It seems like the relationships, I don't know whether it's right or not to say that they're warped, but they seem a little warped, and it seems like we have to figure out a whole lot of things on our own. And I'm trying to figure out what I need to do economically, and I work for myself now, and I'm putting myself in positions such as buying property and things like that so that I don't have to work for someone else. But it's still kind of difficult because, you know, you have people knocking on you talking about, well, what about benefits, and you're not going to have a retirement plan. And I am thinking about those things, and I'm taking care of those things, but it's like, it's not the majority of the people my age, or even when we look at the generation before us, that will say, it's okay to go and work for yourself, it's all right. You know, it's like, everyone wants me to worry about, well, what about your vacation time, and what about your benefits? And to me, all of those things are minuscule because I can work for myself. You know, so it feels like we don't really have anyone to go to as a guide. And I'm not sure if you're saying your book can give some of that information there, so that's why I'm saying this is probably more of a comment than a question. But I feel like, you know, we do need a guide as to what to do. Like, I feel like I'm figuring out some things on my own, but I can certainly use something or someone that can guide me and say, okay, well, maybe this is a little bit better than that. It's like I'm figuring it out, I'm doing it. But, you know, if there's someone or something that I can go to that has the blueprint there, then I'll follow that.
Okay, I got a lot of different ways to respond to what you said. One of the things that black people struggled for in the 40s and 50s was more options for their kids. You know, if you go back in the 40s and a black person wanted to be a, quote, professional, they only had about 4 or 5 things they could be. They could be a teacher, preacher, social worker, doctor, lawyer, funeral parlor director, 2 or 3 other things. That's it. That's like 8 things. So most of your professional class, your middle class, the people who called the shots in the various organizations that we were a part of, did about one of 8 or 9 things, okay? And what they said was, I want my son or my daughter in the future to be able to be an engineer, to be a politician, to be a this, a that, or the other, and that's opportunity and so on and so forth. Well, with opportunity comes more comes the need to be more calculating in directing your energy, your focus, because, say for example, if I give you a combination lock, right? And the combination lock is you go left and you go right, and the lock opens, right? But suppose I had a lock that says you go left, you go right, you go right, you go left, you go left, you go right, you go right, you go left. That means that's 8 different things you got to remember. You have to write those down. It's hard to memorize all 8. So the lock might be more secure in terms of people not being able to break in and figure out, you know. But by the same token, you gotta invest more time to open up that lock, because you got to turn it around 8 different times. It's the same thing with any list of options. The more options you have, actually, the more opportunity it is to make a mistake. You know, if you can only go one way, if they say if you're in a farm, and you got the main road, and every once in a while there's a road, and they tell you to go to Johnson's farm, you go down this road and make a left at the post office and then go down 2 miles, you're there. But if I put you in Trenton, I mean, when you go 4 or 5 miles, you done pass about 15 different streets. And there's that many more opportunities to go to the wrong street. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So they were right in saying that we need to have more opportunities for our children, but by the same token, what wasn't factored in was how it is that you negotiate all these things to decide which is the right and the best decision for your particular situation. That's an onus that they figured you have to carry, since you're the ones going to be having the opportunities. You figure that out, so to speak, okay? Now, let's talk about, finally, you said something that triggered a thought, and I kind of lost my train of thought temporarily. But, oh, I know what it was. In every race, I'll just say the United States. I won't say the world. I don't know enough about the world. But in the United States, among every race, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, probably less than 15% of any race works for themselves. Okay? So the portion of people who work for themselves are always greatly in the minority compared to the majority who works for somebody else. Now, true, the Koreans might work for another Korean, the Hispanic might work for another Hispanic, you know, we're going to work for white people going to work for white people. But the bottom line is that the entrepreneur, basically of all races, always has to hear it about how crazy they are for doing what they're doing. Do you know, you've heard of a guy named Donald Dell? Anybody here? Donald Dell. He started Dell Computers. Okay. You heard of Steve Jobs from Apple Computer? You heard of Bill Gates? Do you know what they all share in common?
They all dropped out of school.
They all dropped out of school. They all dropped out of... You name me a multi-millionaire in the computer business, and I'll show you somebody that dropped out of college.
The guy who started Yahoo?
Right. He was at Stanford. He dropped out of college too, right? See, what happens is, as a people who don't feel good about ourselves, we depend on college, so that's a label that we can add to our resume, college graduate, so that people can feel better about us and we feel better about ourselves. White folks don't have that problem. White folks said, look, all this shit is just a means to get to the real deal, which is the company, the product, the service, the profit, the power, the status. So what are they going to do? I mean, here's Donald Dell making about $100,000 a month, and he's got orders coming in his dormitory for them to send out his computers, and he says, well, but I got to graduate. For what? For what? Just go do what it is that you were evidently put on earth to do, which is get involved in the technology field. If you do that, you will have done. You're going to learn more doing what you're supposed to do than you're ever going to learn finishing school. So we as a people don't have that kind of mentality. Why? Because we basically do not trust our own creativity. When somebody, you know, I'm going to tell people about books. I know a little bit about books, okay? When I try to sell books to a black person, what they reveal to me is the imprint of their education. And the imprint of their education as a black person is this. Your mind is a blank sheet of paper. You don't know doo-doo. The only way you're going to know anything is to read somebody else who knows something. And so the more that you read, the more that you will know, because you'll be taking in all this information. So you'll be the sum total of these thoughts here. That's not the way white folks think. White folks have respect for their own ideas. And so they say, okay, this book has a value for giving me information, but this book also has a value because it can help me dislodge an idea that was already in my mind, halfway developed. All it did was help me get the other part of that problem.
Very good. Right.
But see, you don't have that as a way of looking at education, because you've been programmed to think what you think either is wrong or don't mean nothing.
Right.
Okay? So when these white boys are in college, they have they're in love with their own brain. That's real. Just like a bodybuilder can be in love with his own body, some of those guys are in love with their own brain.
And they've been taught to trust it.
Right, and they've been taught to trust it. See, we get to, I don't want to get too far off subjects, but in certain areas, we get confident. We get confidence in athletics and in music. It's not written on here that you're supposed to play that. That don't mean nothing. I just felt what it was I was supposed to play, and they played it. The playbook don't say you're supposed to go off tackle. It's supposed to say you're supposed to go through the middle. How'd you do that move? Well, when I got there, it was jammed up. So I figured I would go this way and go that way, and the goal line I knew was bing. So, we're very creative in areas where we respect our intuition in terms of coming up with an answer when the supposedly obvious answer is really not the answer.
And where we've seen success.
Right. Now you take us out of that area and we say, well, what does the white man say? How did he do it?
Yep.
So that's what we have to get away from, because I'm going to tell you something. Every game in this life, whether it be acting, opera, you name it, every game that black people have decided to play, we pretty much mastered. As a matter of fact, almost every game that we've decided to play, white folks say, and we've been doing this for 100 years, and we ain't come up with no shit like that.
Right.
They are genius. How'd they do that? You know what I mean? But the game that we haven't played is business. And it's the only game where everybody else is playing but us. And it's also a game that is in nobody's benefit to tell us go play it. Because as soon as they say, okay, you play this game, that's money out of their pocket.
We mastered just like we mastered all
Exactly.
Same thing we did with basketball and football before they let us into the league.
Right.
There was no creativity in basketball and football.
Exactly.
We got into the league, there was Jim Brown and Gail Sayers.
Earl Monroe, the whole thing.
The same reason you said that at the Kwanzaa event, nobody started naming black historical economic leaders, because we don't know them. Same reason this sister doesn't have the roadmap, or we don't trust our own instincts to develop business. We know, we've seen what Michael Jordan can do with the ball. So we got confidence, okay, we can do. We see that. We see Michael Jordan's everywhere walking up and down the street. But we don't see successful black businessmen. So when we get an idea, we say, well, nobody else black did it. I might not be able to do it. But if we saw hundreds of black businessmen successful, we say, oh, this ain't nothing.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
What the brother was saying, like Amos Wilson spoke of abstract thinking, to take yourself out of present reality. You may not have seen that black example of a black economic giant, but if you can see a sports figure, then translate that into economics. I know when I was growing up, doing what we do out in the street, I said, man, if you can apply this to something positive, we can accomplish success there too. So we were able to put our heads together for a moment, and say, well, let's get out of this world here and go into this realm and apply the same techniques and energy to it, and it worked. So sometimes we feel bad, but then we're not encouraged
Right.
enough. Sometimes, you know. So I think what Amos Wilson was getting at was, since we don't have the blueprint, we don't have the model to go by, then we have to practice what they call abstract thinking, or another form of thought process outside of what we've been given.
Right.
I think that's sometimes a fear factor.
And that's
it. But we again, when you try to think that way, you don't get the encouragement, as the sister said. You don't get the pat in the back.
And the other thing is that nobody's keeping score. I mean, any game can be boring. I mean, there's certain ball players that I'm going to watch because I just like to watch them play. Mm-hmm. But typically, in an average game, whether it be baseball, football, what inning is it? I don't know. What's the score? I don't know. Who's up? I don't know. How much time is left for the end of the game? I don't know. I mean, if nobody's keeping score, then you lose interest in whatever game it is that you're observing. The fact of the matter is that in this society, people keep score on certain things. You know, if you have a comedy show on the WB or UPN that's getting ready to be canceled, you will still make the cover of Jet magazine. Because they keep score of who's who in Hollywood, who's who in music, who's who in sports. But in other more serious areas like business, ain't nobody keeping score.
Right.
You know, I talked to a group in Beaumont, Texas last month, right? Guy wanted to give me a motivational speech. He wanted me to give them a motivational speech. So I asked him, I said, how much money are the top people making in the job that you're doing? She said, you mean in Texas or in the country? I said, give me either one. She said, I don't know. You mean you don't know for Texas or you don't know for the country? She said, both. I said, so how can you get all fired up to do your job if you don't even know what the possibilities are based on what somebody else has done? Well, that's a good question. And I'm saying to myself, how in the heck could she be in this business 5 years and don't know what, you know, do you think Ken Griffey don't know what somebody else is making? You think, you know, Barkley don't know what Ewing makes and Ewing don't know what, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
They know.
The agents do.
Right. So I'm saying in your job, most of us on our job, is it, how much you think the supervisor make? Oh, I don't know. Why you ask that? Because you're thinking, if I stay here long enough to be a supervisor, what's that worth? You know what I mean? I mean, that's just natural. Right. So I'm saying, but when nobody's even keeping score, it's very easy to lose interest. And that's part of what we suffer from as a people in the business arena, because people are not keeping score. When Earl Graves put out that Black Enterprise Top 100 list 25 years ago, I mean, that's the first time anybody kept score. You've been hearing about Fortune 500 probably since you've been an adult. Right. Because they keep, to them, the stock market, what the stock closed today? I mean, everything is scoring. That doesn't make it right, but at least they have some perspective as to when is good times good and when is bad time bad. I'm still looking for the times that everybody says, you know, I hear people say, with this increase in racism, I'm saying, now I'm 51, was there a year that racism just like dropped and I missed it? Was I asleep? You know, I don't remember no year where racism just dropped, you know, with this increased tension among the races. What increased tension? This ain't diddly squat compared to what it was years ago. So, you know, one of the part of the problem is that we don't have a way, you know, of keeping score, and I think that's important. You got a question too?
Yeah, question. Yeah, like I said, some of your comments triggered a lot of thoughts. Like Tim and I both dropped out of college.
Okay.
And when we decided to reorganize Razzaq's book, we went the small business development route.
Okay.
We were going, and I mean, these people, they were willing to loan us the money, put us in a spot, and make us have to pay a lease and make us have to worry about how we want to pay those bills. But we chose a different path to our eventual economic success, and that was basically through the lecture series and some other developments. And those things came after, like I said, your comments about maybe having to plow your own way and different things. And I started to see some things that maybe it wasn't articulated, but those are the things we chose to do. But back to what the sister was asking you, my thoughts were this way, and I'll ask it in the form of a question to get your comments. the principle of cooperative economics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying that you were part of the original development of those 7 principles, but even now, see, we're taught that cooperative economics means maybe buying some stuff together, stuff like that. But couldn't even that principle of cooperative economics be applied to what she's talking about us building the roadmap? She's trying to develop her own self economically. We're trying to develop our own selves entrepreneurially.
Mm-hmm.
I know practically everybody that came and sat here tonight has some economic or entrepreneurial interest.
Mm-hmm.
So even the principle of cooperative economics, would you maybe, do you see where that, just using that as a word, since that's the word for tonight or whatever, would you comment some on that?
Well, in 1987, at University of Louisville, they have something called the Black Family Conference. They've been having it year after year after year. I think this is up to like almost 20 years now. And they pick a theme. And every year they have like maybe 15, 20 speakers be brought in, all talking about this one theme. And one year, believe it or not, they picked black economics. And it was the first time that myself and Karanga was speaking at the same program on the same day. And I got his tape. I sat there and listened to him. I had his tape. And in this tape, he delineates his problems with black capitalism. And see, the problem is this. Many of the people in the Afrocentric community look at any business venture as capitalist, but yet they don't have a cooperative economic model. One of the people that I was going to dedicate my book to, Kwanzaa and the Black Economy, was Jose Ferrer, for starting the Kwanzaa Expo up in New York. They just had it, I guess, last week at Jacob Javits Center. And in my discussion with Jose Ferrer about what I was doing, he told me that he caught a lot of heat from, he didn't name any names, but it was 3 people that you would have heard of, about how he was, quote, using Kwanzaa to make money himself. He was making Kwanzaa commercial. He was doing all the kinds of things that they had a problem with, and so therefore they didn't necessarily support his venture in terms of making Kwanzaa. Now, the fact of the matter is that if Kwanzaa is 30 years old, and if cooperative economics is so important that it's one of the major principles, then why isn't a workable model of cooperative economics existing somewhere, if not in Trenton, then in New Jersey, if not in New Jersey, on the East Coast, if not on the East Coast, somewhere in America? Why can't somebody point to a city or a company or something that says, this is the working model of cooperative economics, it generates these many jobs, we produce these kind of products, these are the benefits to the cooperative, these are the benefits for the community, their families, whatever the case might be, and y'all should look at this as the roadmap and as to what we need to do in all the other cities that we live in. That's never happened, to my knowledge. But they're very good at critiquing what exists. You know, Malifi Asante created one of the first and one of the few doctoral programs in African American Studies at Temple University. Okay? I grabbed the Temple University catalog. I went through the catalog and I counted 54 courses that you could take in African American Studies. Not a single one in economics. Now they got elementary Hausa,
Right.
elementary Swahili, the study of voodoo. I mean, you name it. What happened in Egypt? But out of 54 courses leading all the way up to the doctorate degree, you don't have a single course? Hakeem Mahabudi sold 200 copies of a book I had a serious problem with. Black men, obsolete, stolen, what a dangerous, okay?
Right.
In the back of his book, he has 200 books that he thinks you should become familiar with in terms of being, I guess, an expert on black people, right? Out of those 200 books, I think one dealt with black economics.
Right.
I mean, is that where economics ranks 1/200th of something? That's a 0.5%. How could it be that and one of the cardinal several principles at the same time? So I'm saying that cooperative economics basically is based on the creativity of the people to make it work. They have the theory. We've been hearing the theory. It's up to either this generation to actually put it in practice, or we're going to feel awful foolish 20 more years from now, 50 years after the origin of the holiday, still talking about it, and still nobody been able to point to it.
Well, I can feel pretty comfortable with what you just said, because that was basically what I was getting at. There might not be that blueprint there, but I think there's enough of us here that we might have to be the creators of that blueprint. I don't have a,
and you have to develop a thin skin. You have to develop a thick skin, rather, in terms of the criticism from people who supposedly know. You know, supposedly know.
Amen. Yes, sir.
So anyway, I like to sell a few books. For some of you, as far as my own books are concerned, I have 2 here. Getting Back Folks to Sell.
You have the first, the very first?
No, I don't have that one. That's coming. That's coming in about another month.
Oh, is that a press?
Yeah. Getting Back Folks to Sell was something I put together 10 years ago. It was a book that was done because I ran into many people who wanted to be in business, but yet did not think it was important for them to know anything about selling. And I thought that was quite comical, really. It was like saying I want to be a boxer, but I don't want to know anything about hitting or receiving punches. So I put that book together to kind of tie the whole idea of business and that together. This book, Money Issues in Black Male-Female Relationships, what can I say about this book here? This book, I will never work as hard on a book again in life as I did this book. I'm not doing it. This book was put together to, first of all, express a male point of view on relationships, since society seems to think that only women have something to say about relationships. I mean, they write the books, they do the talk shows, they do that's their thing. So I said, well, men do have positions that they take on relationships. It was also designed to answer a lot of questions that black women have consistently asked about black men, because we weren't coming up with answers, and they were good questions. Questions on communication, commitment, white women, education, all kinds of things. So what I try to do in this book is to explain the role that I think money plays in the decisions that black men and black women make vis-a-vis each other. And so that's the purpose of this book. The other books here basically deal with 3 areas. Money management. I highly recommend this book as a money management book. Also, there's another book here, Smart Money Moves for African Americans. There's another category of books called motivational books. I would put Les Brown's book in that category. I would put Dennis Kimbrough's Motivations for African American Success in that category. I would put Success Runs in Our Race in that category. Then there are kind of history. There are history type books where they talk about kind of like where we are as a people and relative to white people. Black labor and white wealth would be in that category. Black economics by Juwan's is in that category. And black wealth and white wealth is in that category.
Yes.
And then there's books on entrepreneurship, about actually starting a business. Black wealth through black entrepreneurship comes in that category. Do you want profits or paychecks comes in that category. This book here is $8. $8. So, okay, was they gonna pay me or pay you? Pay me?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. I'm gonna need to collect some more money before I can bust that 50 right now.
You can bust it. I can bust it.
So you're going to get those too?
No, I'm gonna just get yours. Yeah.
What is that blue one? Let's see that again.